Okay, today we're talking about Beryl. Beryl is a bit of an interesting character because she acts as a bit of a capstone to several aspects of our overarching story. Narratively, she ends the whole missing mother subplot that was introduced in 2.0. She echoes some ideas that were put forth on Operon, and she also brings some clarity to the nature of fate and the golden thread that we see in 2.8. Thematically, Barl is a sort of logical conclusion to an established idea that we have seen in previous character stories, particularly those of the intellect of Latus, that of the burden of knowledge. To be uniquely gifted is not always a boon, because as we have seen countless times over, to possess incredible insight does not necessarily guarantee happiness or fulfillment. Oftentimes it's the very opposite. Now, in some cases, it is a mental or emotional burden. Aleph, in his pursuit of the transcendental, becomes a bottomless vessel of knowledge, and in doing so fractures his very essence, driving himself to madness. Mesmer Jr. is a prodigy among her bloodline, yet what follows is not accolades and pride as one would expect, but the cold weight of status, of expectation that cares not for the self, but for the enrichment of the lineage at the expense of the individual. In other cases, this burden is more existential. 6. Upon learning of first his own fate and later that of his home, falls into a nihilistic despair, knowing that nothing he does will stop what's coming. X's view on causality leads him to a path of hard determinism, the idea that the outcome is fixed, that free will cannot truly exist in a system where parameters have already been accounted for. The equation is already established, all that matters are the variables inserted, right? Solve for X. So, if knowledge has the capacity to be this incredible burden, what then of someone whose knowledge borders on the divine? Beryl takes this idea, this recurring theme, and brings it to its logical extreme, not to simply be the best in one's field or to know the outcomes of one's immediate surroundings or the fate of one's self or home, but to know everything. The entirety of the past, present, and future laid out like the bends of a long flowing river, and her overseeing it from on high. She is almost a deity, the closest one could possibly get to omniscience without having an actual spark of the divine nestled within them. And like those that came before her, the greatness of that gift grants not solace or even heartbreak or misery. What it gives her is complete and utter alienation, a divinity among mortal men but never truly of them. For Beryl, the future is as readily apparent as the very present she physically exists in, and as such holds just as much weight, not as a tenuous what if, but as a determined outcome that needs only be affirmed by the world. Nothing tethers her to the present, so she drifts unmoored among the entirety of time, placing no special significance to any particular point on it. Her entire existence is entirely antithetical to the human experience. Now, a common trope in many series, particularly of the time travel genre, is that of infinite repetition. The idea of a character returning to the same time, repeating the same actions ad nauseum to the point that they grow dull and detached from the world. A hope for some sort of absolution that gradually devolves into obsession, chasing their goal with single-minded intensity, with the constant exposure to the same experiences, wearing away at any notion of significance or import. What does it matter if they fail in the first or second or thousandth try? Failure ceases to mean anything beyond just another iteration. Death holds lesser and lesser weight. Loss becomes just another stumbling block. The world and the timeline become easily exchangeable for another with maybe marginally better chances of falling in your favor. In a sense, these characters have almost become that same cold deity, no longer properly participating in humanity, but watching as the all-knowing observer from on high, discarding lives and futures simply because they did not suffice. They are, in a way, the same as Beryl. Though they may not have her true omniscience, nor she their experience of 1,000 lifetimes lived, the crux of their plight boils down to the curse of simply knowing too much, of having this perfect foresight, of knowledge robbing them of their attachment to humanity. The only difference is that Beryl doesn't have their hope. The hope of maybe this time or maybe there's another way, because for her there can be no other way. The future has already been established. The path is set. All that is left is to walk it and affirm fate. What weight can any singular person or event truly hold when you already know the outcome? She knew of her mother's fate, yet took no steps to intervene. She followed Broom through Paris, never saying a word of what was to come. She works freely with both the Foundation and Manus with no real regard for allegiance or loyalty. Because whether she has recognized it herself or not, she has long stopped seeing herself as an actual human being, and instead as an auxiliary function of fate itself. Her actions do not hinder or hasten the plan. They were already accounted for and enacted long before she ever even took them. Very little truly tethers Beryl to the present, so she perceives all of time equally, putting no more weight on the current day than she does in the days to come or the days past, a fundamentally isolating perception. Yet in this world of utter certainty, Beryl notes a singular exception. There is a scene towards the end of Showdown in Chinatown where Beryl makes a brief appearance. Briefly but notably, she mentions Matilda, stating, "Were she more perceptive, she would have already discovered me herself. She will find me when she is ready." Initially, I had read this as willful neglect, as a refusal to acknowledge her own kin unless she was worthy. It would definitely fall in line with Matilda's profile notes and just the general attitude of parents in this game. However, knowing what I do now about Beryl, I kind of have to reject this notion. Beryl isn't callous or apathetic towards her daughter, she is simply inhuman. To say that Matilda will see her when she is ready is not a demand for competence, but a simple declaration of faith. They will meet at the appointed time, something that Beryl does not mind because, like everything else in her perception of life, it is already decided. It will come when it comes. It isn't that she doesn't care about her own daughter, but the way that she expresses that care is so utterly alien that no one, Matilda or otherwise, can truly comprehend it. It comes across as neglect, and as Broom points out, something bordering on cruel. And yet we know that that care does in fact exist.
I had been drifting along the streams of fate when I saw a girl who resembled me, who in some part came from me. It was quite a revelation. I saw where our streams merged long before she was born, and I knew I would name her Matilda. That she would grow up to be kind, brave, and truly gifted. I followed her through every turn and every ripple to the very end. Then I looked away. I stopped watching.
From the source waters to the tributary, she followed that stream, drinking in every detail. Barl, for whom the future is routine and evident with just a passing glance, took the time to examine this stream and no other, an effort that she didn't even think to give for her own mother. The love is undoubtable, but it exists on a level that no one else could possibly comprehend, and in a way that she herself can't really express in tangible terms, nor does she believe there is any need to. Her perception is divorced not just from reality or from consequence or humanity, but from the core aspect of her own being, from her own deepest and most intrinsic feelings, and as a result, it enforces her own isolation, even from her own daughter. Now, every character that we've seen grapple with the enormity of their gift eventually found some way to cope. Mesmer Jr. took ownership of her burden, falling into the role of her own volition, her response to her guilt and misgivings being simply, "Because I'm a Mesmer." Not necessarily the healthiest way to deal with it, but one which allows her to push forward, if even just for a little bit. X reconciled with the certainty of determinism by choosing to place value in the process more than the endpoint. Although his Rube Goldberg machines may seem to simply be a unique quirk to his character, they are fundamentally the way he chooses to assert control in a world that allows for none. 6, knowing his fate, chooses not to reject the inevitable but to prepare for it, to forge a worthy vessel that would not shatter under the weight of fate. Pray to the gods for what you're about to do, pray that all goes well. He doesn't decry or dismiss fate, he accepts it. Similarly, Beryl goes through her own reckoning, eventually choosing to shatter the idol of her own divinity, to shutter the gift that alienated her from the world, and this decision was catalyzed not by her or any of her friends, but by someone rather unexpected. Now, for most, the unknown is something to be feared, something that simply even just pondering brings about anxiety. But for Beryl, the opposite is true. To be faced with uncertainty is a gift that very few can give. Arcana and the Storm gifted her with a question, a stain on an otherwise flawless page. They gifted her a future that had lost all clarity. And it is this gift that finally drives Beryl to motion, to chase something that is, for the very first time in her life, unknown, to see the true face of fate, to finally question the nature of this thing that she had believed up till now to be utterly immutable. And, for quite possibly the first time in her life, she experiences disappointment. With each passing storm, she gathers precious crystals in the hopes that one may enact the ritual that will make fate apparent, yet each passing storm dashes both the crystals and her hopes. Each failure wears down the tranquil detachment of her soul, pulling her closer to the experience of common humanity. And of all people, it is Feliciane who ascertains the truth of Beryl's nature. Feliciane, the character least concerned about fate, the character whose primary directives, sustaining life, gaining power, selfish self-fulfillment, are decidedly human qualities to an almost animalistic degree. She is the one who recognized Beryl, not as some untouchable god, but as a woman who is so detached from the world that concepts and feelings that most would take for granted fly entirely in her blind spot. A woman who is slowly beginning to understand the meaning of life as a human. One cannot substitute simply knowing the course of life for actually having lived it, any more than one can claim to be an expert in the field by simply reading about it. To idle on the banks will not suffice, a truth so obvious yet one that the esteemed diviner could never fully grasp. And finally comprehending this, Beryl echoes her mother's final actions and faces fate. She literally steps from the shores into the waters, plunging into the deluge of the flood, risking utter dissolution to view fate with her own eyes, if only for a moment. For the very first time in her life, she truly immerses herself in the world as an active participant. It is both a burial and a baptism, the end of a deity and the beginnings of a human. The waters that returned one god from death are the same that pulled another from her divine throne. She plunges into the flood and finds fate, only to realize that what she had once thought to be immutable was in fact fractured and chaotic. Perhaps once it had been whole, perhaps once her assumptions on fate's nature had been true, but with the advent of the storm that is no more. She is now freed from the burden of omniscience. Certainty could not exist in this world. The futures that she sees are only tenuous possibilities and nothing more. The transcendental law has been broken, a sentiment eerily reminiscent of Aperon's end, yet where the islanders chose utter destruction with the loss of their absolute, Barl revels in it, recognizing the beauty in fate's face, imperfect as it may be. And with this recognition, the powers that enforce the isolation of her entire life are well and truly severed. When she emerges from the floodwater, she is no longer the bystander on the banks of fate, no longer omniscient, her vision now demonstrably imperfect. She is no divinity, no deity, no god. She is simply Beryl Boanish, another traveler upon the river. And that's about it. While Beryl didn't have as much of a presence in the main story, I definitely think that's by design. I do like how her character story sort of gave us more to work with when it comes to her characterization, but in the end, she still does feel pretty distant. Also, I kind of want to know why she didn't just get completely destroyed after jumping into the flood. Like, did the ritual she was performing protect her? Did fate shield her? Does the storm just take longer to eat people with more potent bloodline? I don't know. Hopefully they touch on more on that eventually, right? Thank you to Bones and Apples, Pump Aerostar, P Damon C 123, Amani Echo, Chip the Second, Sam's V2, and Derp Huffer for being members, and a special thank you to Chip the Second and Amani Echo for the 5 gifteds each. And to everybody else, thank you for coming in. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you on the next one. Alright, bye bye.